Welcome, everyone. We'll just give it a few minutes for everyone to log in and join. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday. I'm gonna just turn off the waiting room so people can join right in. But I believe a few more people are coming on. Thank you all for joining. We'll give it a few more minutes. We'll give it to like 12:05-ish to give people time, since I know there's lots of back-to-back meetings after the long weekend. Thank you all who are just joining. We're going to get started at 12:05 just to give some people a little more time to log in. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. A few more people may trickle in as we go, but for the sake of time, we want to make sure we have ample time to answer questions at the end, and etc. So thank you all for joining today, and I hope everyone had a wonderful long weekend. Today, we wanted to have a webinar on the lessons learned from families of the Children, Youth, and Special Healthcare Needs Project. And in this webinar, we're going to share lessons learned from the parents and caregivers of children and youth with special healthcare needs and their experiences navigating the various service systems, community integration, COVID impact, and accessing necessary supports and services for their children and family. And then at the end, we'll touch base on our next steps. And today we have a mixture of people from all three of the RSCs, so Einstein, Rochester, and WID. We'll kind of take turns rotating and presenting on different topics. So you have myself, Andrea or Dia Dasher. Then we have Miriam Franco, Marcel Patcher, Sabrina Smith, Mariella, Angel, Denise, and Abby. And we'll also introduce ourselves as we each start talking. You can go to the next slide. So just to start out, since I know we have lots of new people, including myself, I started back in March this year. So lots of new faces always. Just a reminder, the CYSHCN program project mission and aims. The mission is to positively impact the lives of children and youth with special healthcare needs and their families by assisting the local health departments and guiding families to needed and appropriate support and services. We have three primary project aims, which is to provide technical assistance to local health departments, to collect and maintain a comprehensive statewide resource directory, and what this webinar is about, engaging families of the children and youth with special healthcare needs. Next slide. So just to kind of go over the family engagement procedures, the process we typically use and have used in the past. So in year 1 and 2, we recruited across the state. We completed intake forms to ensure families fit within the children and youth special healthcare need populations. And then we had individual and group family sessions to hear their input. So just sort of like the diagram says, we started with recruitment, with materials, outreach, the intake forms, then we had family sessions, both group and individual, to build rapport, have a general script, and then follow up with surveys, compensation, and family forums. And now I'll give it over to Angel.
Hey, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Angel Morales. I'm the project manager here at WID for the Children's Special Healthcare Needs Project. So I'm going to talk about how we went after these family sessions and analyzed our data and some of the demographics of our participants and and the children and youth special healthcare needs that were represented. So as Andrea said, we were having family sessions. We had these transcribed, and then we would put them into Deduce software where we added descriptors and coded them, and that's how we analyzed our data. So just to give you a little bit more breakdown of the family sessions, next slide, please. Okay, so there's a total of 167 sessions. That included both individual sessions, so like individual interviews, and also group sessions. There were 63 group sessions, 104 individual sessions. The group sessions ranged anywhere from 2 to 10 participants. The average was about 4. We talked to families in 51 out of 58 counties in New York State. Most of our families came from urban and suburban areas, also some representation from rural areas. The majority were held in English, 144, but we did have 12 sessions that we did in Spanish and 11 in Mandarin. Next slide. Okay, so the parents and the caregivers, which was the majority of participants in our groups, a total of 339 participated. 93% were female, 59% were white, 64% married, 56 attained a bachelor's degree or greater. The majority were between 30 and 49 years old. The majority of them were employed either full or part-time. And most had one child with a special healthcare needs. And it ranged anywhere from 1 to 3 children. 33% of them indicated that COVID-19 had impacted their employment. So as you can tell, you know, it was kind of a lot of white female parents that were represented. That might be like a limitation, but that is that was the breakdown. Next slide. Okay, and then the children and youth with special healthcare needs. So there was 447 children with special healthcare needs represented. 61% were male, 53% white, 71 between 5 and 17 years, and they represented a variety of conditions, which we'll see in the next slide. Okay. So this is the breakdown of some of the conditions. So this is not all conditions, but you'll see that there was a large number of children with autism represented. So 32% at WID, 45% at Einstein, 22% at Rochester. That was the percent of the children represented in those family sessions had autism. Also, quite a few had mental health issues, physical conditions, behavioral conditions, learning disabilities, developmental delays. Next slide. Okay, and then this is just the age of the children with special healthcare needs that were represented. The vast majority were school-aged children, so between 5 and 17 years old. But we did get representation from children early childhood, ranging from birth to 4 years old, and also the adult population from 18 to 21 years old. Next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna pass it off to Mariela now, who's gonna start introducing some of those lessons that we learned from families.
Thank you.
Mariela might be having some technical issues.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stay with my camera off just in case that helps a little bit. Okay. So next slide, please. So before we jump into the general challenges that families identified, we need to address the evidenced impact of the intersectionality between disability and cultural diversity. The first point here refers to the preference of quality of content versus quantity of content. Many of the non-English speaking families that we talked with referred to the bundle of content they received from the different services like schools or medical services, but the little understanding they could gain from it. One of the quotes here highlights how many emails they received from the school, but how little information they could actually digest from it. Another family here reminds us of the importance of having information available in their native languages, especially if it is for their children with special needs. So we have identified that it is important to prioritize the quality of the content versus how many content we provide and how we can make it accessible for all. Next slide, please. The second point refers to the disconnection due to language differences. We have identified a disconnection between providers, services, and resources in general from the families they are to be serving due to language differences. In the first quote here, we hear from a family who expresses how complicated it is to navigate the services needed for their children, but how important it is to encourage patience in the providers and service centers to seek for the actual tools that make equal access to information to everyone. The third quote here makes reference to how valuable it is to include translation services as a bridge to connect the culturally diverse families with each other and with the services needed. Next slide, please. Okay, the third point learned is that when the community receives information, the community is empowered with that information. It is important to consider the impact of providing the information to families, as the third quote here mentions, in a way that they can actually understand and they can make decisions from their own knowledge and discernment. From the first quote, we read from a family's feeling of empowerment from receiving educational tools regarding their family and child's rights. As she says here, so that's where I gained power, and I took what I learned and I managed to apply it as it is the same recipe that I apply where I am, wherever I go. The second family highlighted here tells us about the relevance of identifying community groups in which the members are the actual disseminators of the information and the resources that they know they need. The next slide, please. Lastly, we were made aware of cultural differences and the experiences lived based on these. Families reported facing bigger challenges due to their child being the first generation attending to an American school, for example, from the first quote you can read. I'm the first generation immigrant and I never been to school here, so things are big challenges for me. Families also reported feeling judged based on social and cultural beliefs about their child's functional diversity and or their race identity. Okay, next slide, please. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Marcel.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Marcel Pachter from Einstein, and I am one of the family specialists for the CYSHCN project. And along with Miriam Franco, we facilitated conversations with parents who had family members under the age 21 with special healthcare needs, as well as self-advocates. And we learned what all those families faced over the years, going through the system, discovering how they wish to improve family experiences. So here we have just one of the parents' comment that we choose to represent the impact on the family unit. In fact, some of the parents we interviewed didn't know how or where to start learning to navigate through the system. Plus, sometimes with language barriers, financial support, social support, community integration, education services, referrals, evaluations, employment, and self-care, right? This is what we literally extracted from this mom from the Bronx. And she said, so the plan that his father and I had during our pregnancy of becoming new parents, that plan went out of the window. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we just highlighted 4 of the impacts on the family unit, as well as quotes taken from some parents that we interviewed that you can see here on the right. But basically the first 2 points, challenges when parents are going through the steps to obtain diagnosis, and also the impact of diagnosis and life balance, I believe are already explained with what I said in the previous slide. So moving on, about formal and informal support. What we have learned from our sessions is that parents are a little bit overwhelmed with understanding systems and being informed about supports. I know through my own experience as a single mom, self-advocate, and professional in the health field system that is very challenging. Like there is no way that one person, a parent, with all they already are dealing with, is going to know how to navigate the whole system alone. So that is when connections were necessary for them. And that is when we learn that parents need to connect by attending, for example, to a parent support groups. And that is where they exchange experiences, resources, skills, like helping each other, making a little easier to go through language barriers and cultural differences as well. Regarding parents as advocates, over all our interviews, parents made us to believe that they learn a lot from other parents just by sharing personal experience. Sometimes you don't know about resources or services, and then like boom, naturally other people around you, like parent advocates who are in similar situations, circumstances, can help to get information easier. We have learned from families that sometimes they didn't think of themselves as an advocate, but in many ways, they realized, I am already an advocate. They kind of learn that every time they speak up for themselves, their children or others who, because they have some challenges or disability that prevents them from speaking up by themselves, they are advocating. And we learn and we are thrilled that we can share this with us and after with you, right? Miriam, now Miriam, you will go next. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. So hi, everyone. My name is Miriam, and I am from the Einstein RSC. And another central theme that we discussed with families in our sessions was accessing supports and services. And with that, the positive impact of services and support and the challenging educational system, some of the barriers in accessing those supports and services. So positive impact of services and support. High quality services can lead to improvement in child skills and relieves pressure on primary caregivers. And some of the helpful aspects of services and supports include being supportive to the family and child, being responsive, flexibility, and the coordination of services and support. And I just want to highlight two of quotes directly from parents in our session. So the first one speaks to nursing care and respite services, how having those services allowed the caregiver to relieve some pressure, not only relieve pressure, but attend to other responsibilities. And then the second quote speaks to the support that this parent was offered through the school district and how she was thinking the process was overwhelming, but with that support and the responsive of the school district, she was able to go through that process without major difficulties. Barriers to support and services. So some of the barriers that parents shared with us were, these are just some, personal shortages, the lack of provider knowledge, and the complexity of systems when navigating, financial barriers, barriers in language, not understanding how to obtain the services and support or what services and supports are available, and the geographical. So not having those supports and services in the area. And then again, we just want to highlight some of these quotes that directly speak to the barriers of services and support. So this is a family that had this that states that they have been able to obtain the respite service and community rehabilitation hours, but they don't have a person to provide that service. So they are on a waiting list. And then this other family speaks about the whole process being so confusing and extremely vague, And this just speaks to some of the frustrations that, or some of the challenges that parents confront when engaging to navigating for services and supports. And now the challenges in the educational system. Some parents discuss the difficulty in navigating the educational system. A lot of programs not meeting the needs of the diverse learners. Parents having to rely on out-of-district placements, the poor parent-professional partnerships, parents having to resort to litigation, and concerns about the future. So again, these are just two highlights that we want to share that speak to the challenges that parents face. So here is a family saying that there is no inclusion in their school district, they don't have a placement for the child, and that the whole experience was a nightmare. And then we have another quote here that talks about the transition process. You know, transitions are a period to adapt, not only for the child, but for the parent as well. This parent didn't feel supported during the transition. The child spends a lot of time on the bus, just entering the preschool setting. So she speaks on that frustration. And now I will hand it over to my colleague Denise. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Denise Lopez, and I am a family specialist at WID, and I will be walking you through accessing the community. And there are three components that I'll be speaking about, and that is experiences accessing the community itself, parent hesitation, personality, and effort, and the socialization opportunities in the community. Next slide, please. Thank you. So with the experiences accessing the community, there are some components to that where families of the CYSHCN population are accessing the community with varying levels of success. And as the previous presenters were talking about some more daunting components to this journey, I'm going to be talking about some things that overlap a little bit, but that are a little bit more on the positive side. So there are sensory issues that are related to those successes. The location of, again, whether it's rural and suburban families that often face a lack of offerings and the distance of those offerings. We have the financial concerns, the culture and inadequate supports. We have a few families that here they say that they have put their children or their child into a sport where they really enjoyed it, but the coach or the person that's ahead of it yelled a lot. And again, if you have sensory issues, then that makes it a lot harder for the child or children to receive those directions and carry them out. And then it can't be processed. And so this particular activity will be seen as negative versus positive. We have another one where the school district itself didn't have any activities for special needs children. And if there was something, they had to go further outside of their district. And again, we go back to financial concerns and location being a problem where there is a level of not just I can't afford it or it's too far. It's just going back to like transportation, what Miriam was talking about, piggybacking off of that, where the child can't be in a vehicle for 45 minutes each way to go into this activity and then to find it pleasurable for them and for the caregiver or parent. So those are components that unfortunately can be a little on the negative side. Next slide, please. Thank you. Parent hesitation, personality, and effort. So parents' attitudes and or concerns about reaction of others are changed by the following. We have negative experiences with attitudes and lack of understanding and time. So there are a lot of things that come into play here. You have young parents, older parents, it doesn't really matter. It mostly depends on experience. If you have a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, you really haven't been on this journey too long to develop what I call a thicker layer of skin. So when you experience people not being patient or being a little bit too aggressive or assertive, and you're there to protect your child, it can look like you're acting out yourself. It can look like you're being aggressive. And that's not really what's going on. And so anybody with a high IQ, emotional IQ, or a lower one is going to be seen as adversarial, and you're going to look like you're the crazy person. So unfortunately, that's not something that ever really goes away. However, in time, you learn to deal with these things. Unfortunately, it is something that you can't teach someone. It does come with experience, and it also comes with the person's temperament and personality. The next one is parent advocacy. Advocacy and planning is necessary to do the following. It's to obtain quality inclusion and access to community spaces and activities, and integrate children that need specific accommodations. So those are components that we can't really, as parents, caregivers, and others, cannot control. But with, again, time, a lot of things can change. So for example, we have a parent or family rather in Westchester that says that they've gone to many libraries in their county, and a lot of times they tell the librarian in advance that their child may be a little loud. He may interact with them in a more invasive way, just to give them a heads up. And as the years have gone on, they have been way more understanding. So that's a real positive in that direction, but it does need to be a little bit more mainstream so that parents are able to, with all of the accommodations that may be out there and the offerings that are out there, they may be taken advantage of. Because if those accommodations, those hierarchies are intended to, whether they be first tier, second tier, third, they are not going to take their children out if they feel that their children are going to be subject to some negativity and or themselves. Because you have to be courageous, you have to be brave to get out there and to deal with those that may not be as understanding and on your side and your child's side as you might want them to. The next slide, please. So we come to socialization opportunities in the community, and we face successful community inclusion, which is the addressing of isolation, and it can be facilitated by understanding and compassion of others. We can have established supports and accommodations that can also help to provide families with more access to community spaces. And finally, the broad community inclusion, and that can give the SHIN population opportunities for rich and full lives and provide the families with relief. And so we touched on those before, and I'll speak personally as a parent of 3 autistic children. Those components are very important, although I may be a professional that knows a lot about resources and things of that nature. I'm still an individual who still deals with this on my own. I am what you would call a strong individual. But if I didn't have the training that I have, I do not believe I would be as courageous and as brave to go out into the world and subject my children to the not so friendly individuals that might be out there. So we have a quote from a family that says that their church has been very good and supportive, which is great. And it also helps that a deacon has a child with special needs, we would assume. And so the people are compassionate, and she has a child that is 15 years old. So there are times where people might think, oh, the kid is, not a kid, is a teenager. But they're going through the same issues, whether it be behavioral, whether it be sensory overload. And so there may not be as much understanding, but here we find that there's no judgment and that there is some level of understanding, although they may not be saying what you might call the right thing, but there is a level of understanding that can take away some of that pressure and overwhelmingness from that parent or guardian. Excuse me. Next slide, please. And now I will hand it over to my colleague, Abby.
Thank you, Denise. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Beer, and I'm a project assistant here at WID. So I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19. So a couple of themes came up when we were talking to our SHCN families. And the first one was that COVID-19, first of all, it exacerbated some existing issues and it placed an additional burden on parents. So we have some quotes from parents. One parent was talking about how wearing a mask is really hard for him. So I'm not able to take him out much. It makes me sad. I'm limited because he can't tolerate wearing the mask. And then another parent was talking about during the whole COVID outbreak, there was a real gap and problem with special needs children and childcare. And when the governor's office mandated the schools provide childcare for first providers, the special needs children were not taken into consideration. So those were some thoughts from our parents. Next slide, please. Okay. In addition, COVID-19 exacerbated some parent and child anxieties. With the parents, especially all parents during COVID, it was tough. You know, kids were home from school, working parents, all parents had to juggle. But with children with the special healthcare needs, there was the additional angle of the juggling therapies and additional things via telehealth. So the parent told us that they were afraid they were going to lose their job because they can't go to work. They have to be with the child, teaching and do all the therapies. And in terms of the children's anxieties, a parent told us where we live, there's less things in walking distance. So there's a park, but since COVID, my son does not want to leave the house. He wants to stay in his room and listen to music and read books. Getting him to leave the house is really hard. But in the past, we loved the park. We loved the library. Next slide, please. And then last, regarding COVID-19, there was both concerns about regression, but some parents also spoke about some progress that their children made during the pandemic. So with regression, a parent told us, I started seeing my son do stimming like I've never really seen him do that since he was little. So I knew something was wrong. I've been trying to find counseling for him because that lack of socialization has really impacted him and learning through a screen has really impacted him. And yet with progression, a parent told us that recently during COVID time, my child has learned to ride her bike. So that was something that I never thought would happen. So that was really awesome. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn back over to my colleague, Marcel.
Thank you, Abby. Variations by culture and language. Well, cultural diversity makes communication more challenging, right? And since we all know that people with different cultures, background are different, the language, I will say alphabet and signs, even signs used by the deaf community are also different. And different cultures have different meaning of words, behaviors, and gestures. So we all learn that cultural and language also gives rise to prejudices, ethnocentrisms, manners, and opinions, which make even more difficult to understand something in a language that is different from our native language. And when it comes to the developmental disabilities community, parents share with us that they will love and also expect resources besides in their own language, in plain language. Next slide, please. All right. Language barriers were issues for several parents because in order for them to communicate with doctors and providers regarding their children's diagnosis, accessing different services and systems of care, they have to find their own way to get all the documents translated. Parents talk with us about language barriers and geographical barriers. And we have here 2 examples. we took from interviews with parents from the Bronx and Westchester, where they told us, I'm just going to read one for us as an example, all right? Let's see. Variation by language. This mom said, I think there should be a little more humanity in that sense, because in my case, they also gave me the diagnosis for her child. It was like, there you go, that's it. I have even remembered that they have told me that I had to learn English in order to understand the brochure they were giving me. I did not speak English at the time. I had to go to a translator to have everything translated. And I mean, they don't give you enough information in Spanish. That's what this says. Next slide, please. Yeah, here we have as an example parent recommendations, and parents basically suggest that will be good if there is more information, more contribution for children with special needs, not only children, but also adults with special needs. Next slide, please. Thank you. More parent recommendations we have here on mentioning more of the ones we heard from parents, and they are supports from the whole family, information and coordination between systems. They suggest having more care coordinators. This was something that came up very often in our discussions with parents, disability awareness training, and to have inclusive community opportunities was also highly mentioned. We want to share a few quotes we choose from some of our interviews with parents, just to represent some of their recommendations. And now I will hand it over to my colleague, Sabrina. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sabrina Smith from Rochester, New York. So our next steps for connecting lessons learned from our families of SHCN to the work that we currently do. Next slide, please. So connecting with SHCN families and professionals, we provide technical assistance to our local health department SHCN programs. We are producing webinars for SHCN families and professionals. We're developing infographics and from the main findings for professionals. We're developing a statewide resource directory for SHCN families and professionals, creating brochures for SHCN families based on feedback shared, and continuing to collect information from our SHCN population and families. Next slide, please. Current educational materials we have for families are a healthcare transition video, parent advocacy webinar in English and Spanish, navigating barriers to community integration. These can all be accessed at the healthyny.gov website under community special _needs RSC. Next slide, please. Additional resources are the SHCN website, local health department webinars on transition, mental health, LGBTQ+, family forums, newsletters, and our resource directory. Next slide, please. Before we wrap up, we would like to poll, before we share your reactions, we would like to poll the audience. So at this time, I'm going to ask Miriam or Mark to please pull up the poll. And we're going to ask everyone to please respond to the question. How relevant was this conversation to your family engagement goals? And this is a single choice. We'll wait for everyone to respond. Okay, great. It looks like we have everyone responded and 80% participated, and thank you. So we will share the results. Okay, great. So we had 32% say this was extremely helpful, 50% said moderately, and 18% said somewhat. And overall, this meeting was helpful, and we had 39% say very helpful and 53% say somewhat helpful. Okay, we can stop the sharing of the poll. Okay, while we're waiting for the poll we can stop sharing the poll. At this time, if there are any reactions, initial reactions that you would like to share via the chat or by the raising of your hand using the function buttons, you can do so. And we had Barbara Falkman. She posted to everyone in the chat the Parents' Bill of Rights for New York State English language learners and multiple learners and ELL parent hotline. She shared some very valuable information along with a link if you'd like to get more information as it relates to the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages. So thank you very much for sharing that, Barbara. Anyone else would like to share anything? Do you have any suggestions for some of the issues mentioned today? That's another question that we'd like to ask, if you would like to share that via the chat or by unmuting yourself. Barbara shared another, a guide for parents of English language learners and multiple learners in New York State. Got transition. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. There's some valuable information being shared via the chat. So please make sure you access those resources as needed. At this time, before we begin to wrap up, I am going to ask one of the team members from Einstein if they would please share the survey in our chat for our local health departments to please provide feedback as it relates to this webinar. Next slide, please, Mark. Thank you all so much from the team at Rochester, Einstein, and WID for all of your just participation today during our webinar. We hope this has been of great support to you and as a resource. And if there's anything that we can do for you, please feel free to reach out to your regional support centers. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.